So again, I'm showing and proving, because again, these ain't Arab. Arabs don't dress like this. These are Moors. This is in Morocco. These are Moors. Look at the crescent. Look at the two camels in the back. Look at the hashish. I told you, the hookah. And look at the two Moors, the two sheiks on the side holding them down. This is why we Moors are at the top. It's why they hate. Because they're going to say, oh, well, they look like Arab. It don't matter what they look like. What was they dressed like? Show and prove again. Now, the word Barbary, right, comes from the different clans. You had the Bambara, the Berber, the Bahi, the Beya, the Bayanu, the Bedouin, right? And they had cousins further east who dwelt in a place called Benin that we now call Ghana. Understand? So we Moors, we're descended from those clans over here. Because those are still considered ancient Riffian clans. Now, as the barbarous Moors, as they called us, right? As barbarous Moors, that means that we are of the barbarian powers or the barbarian powers. They say barbarians are evil, but everybody loved Conan, right? Ain't Conan a barbarian? Right? Everybody loved He-Man, right? Ain't He-Man a barbarian? But look how dark Conan and He-Man is. See what I'm saying? And even in the Conan movie, it showed you that the Moors was running that through the Temple of Set, the Naga, with James Earl Jones. And he had the straight black hair, like the Moors over here. You understand? The straight black hair was for the Moors over here, not the Moors over there. In Egypt, and what they call Egypt over there, they would shave their heads and then wear the wigs. But that was only after the war that turned all that place nuclear. That was the war with the Hyksos in them. That's what turned most of that into the desert. Understand? So, so look at this. First, on the right-hand side, get this book, Indian Slavery in Colonial America. Just flip Indian for more, and you'll see exactly what I'm saying. Look at these tribes. So-called tribes, right? Look, Algonquin. Now, Algonquin, again, is Haudenosaunee. Ottawa is Ottoman. Okay? Potawatomi is Potawatomi. Potawatomi. Okay? Kickapoo, Chicopoo, Illinois is Illinois. Okay? Ojibwa, Chippewa, all of these, Lake Superior, all of this, Lake Huron, all of this. Look, so all of these are Moors, right? All of these are so-called Indians, right? But look what they call them. The distribution of the barbarous tribes east of the Mississippi. So that's it, Moors. Like, what else they gonna say? I'm showing and proving to you that the so-called Indians they talking about, they already done listed them as barbarous, meaning that they Moors. So what are they talking about? That when they got maps, when they got barbarous maps of the barbarous tribes of the east of the Mississippi, meaning that these was the ones that were specifically in that. And look, all of these are the tribes that had the initial treaties with the so-called colonial powers, right? Right? So this is backed up in this book. When we talk about these so-called Patuan and all these people, these are Moors, these are Muslims that was dealing with whatever tribal connection they was dealing with. But essentially, they were still part of the Greater Moorish Empire, which is because all of this was still connected to Granada, which again was over here. How can we prove that? Well, let's see. Let's go first. Here go the pyramid they found over there. While I was doing the knowledge to that, let me get this out. The old capital we had in Chicago that they blew up. I'm looking for this other joint. Just give me a second. Yep, but when we say Egyptian, right, that's different than Mizraimic. Mizraimic is really what we should be calling it. Here go another castle over here. All of this is over here. The stuff I'm showing. Mizraimic, because that's the people of Mizraim. Mizraim is Missouri, Mississippi, all of that. And so because we can prove that Granada is over here, I don't know what these Negroes is talking about in terms of us not being from over here. If I'm showing you a map, okay, on your right is the barbarous map, right? The map of the barbarous states of Moors and their clans. Okay. And then over here is the Viceroyalty of Granada. Here in what today would be, this is when Guyana was further in, and I guess not an island. You know what I'm saying? And then all of this, Venezuela, this is where all the oil in the world come from. The greatest oil reserve in the world is right here in Venezuela. That's why Venezuela going to do what they're going to do. That's why Venezuela get more money than all the African nations combined. So this gives the Chinese the reason to really be up in there and hold it down just in case the United States go buck. And then you got Colombia, where all the cocaine come from, right? And then you got Brazil, and then you got Ecuador. And then through there, you get the Panama Canal, which, as you can see, was already there. This is going back to the late 1400s. The Panama Canal was already there. So I don't know what they was digging out. They was digging out maybe another part of it, but it was already there. So what I'm showing and proving to you and the world is the barbarous Moors, right? The barbarians, right? The Barbaries, the Tartarians, the Tatarians, the Tamoancan, as they're also called, the Monacans, the Monacan Empire, as it was also called, the Amaraca, right? The Maracas, right? This is the Almaracas, like this is us. This is where Granada fell. So yeah, we had the dominion over there in Hispania, but that was also just based on what we had over here. And that was peopled by the peoples of the north, of the southern tribes east of the Mississippi, and had the connection through ancient, because all of this up in here, when we get into further up into Mexico, we get into La Venta and Veracruz and Palenque and all of the places that the so-called Olmec, who eventually went further up into this part of the Mississippi, into Louisiana and all that, and set up the Washoe, right? Who then were connected to the so-called French Acadian Nova Scotians that came over and eventually grouped together into what became the Haitians and the Cajuns. But the Haitians was two you couldn't control them. So they was banished to Hades. You see, to Hades, under Pluto. That's why they got the Haitians like that. But they forced the Haitians to get into the fake Christianity thing and abandon their empire. You see, and then through Napoleon, the Corsican, self-hating Moor, then grouped up with, again, the so-called high table, aka the banking families, who was amalgamated at this time, right, but was bleaching ever so often, while at the same time pledging fealty to the greater, to us. See what I'm saying? So by the time the Barbary Wars came, we had to grip up. And so the descendants of the Caucasoids and these people decided that now that the Moors had been deposed and the world ended in 1492, that now the Venetian oligarchy could use the crusade system to then further cement the destruction of the Moorish Empire through the Society of Jesus, that we call Catholic Society. While at the same time, this so-called Catholic Society is still paying money and fealty to the greater Moorish Empire. You see what I'm saying? They buying themselves time while at the same time selling us out. Buying time, selling us out. Buying time, selling us out. Just like you seen in that movie. But regardless to whoever was what or whatever was happening, you see who was in control. So that's the sign for us to always remember. So in us, when you seen them with the scissors, like I said, you seeing them use the look at something real quick. In the movie Us, you see them in the red jumpsuits because the red jumpsuit represent the red flag, or the scissor betrothed by the red. The scissor, symbolically, in the Bible has its own representation, which we'll dig in a second. But this flag specifically is another one of them flags they don't want you to do the knowledge to, because that's connected to this. You see, it's the same shape, because this is the Osiris. This is them fighting back. This also represents X, but X in Roman numerals represent 10. So this represents the 10 tribes. Excuse me. This represents the cipher, or the completion of the original tribes that was fighting against them, which was, again, the mechanic core, the core of the mechanics, which is why the mechanic order is real big in the West Indies, because those that after the war of Reconstruction, they shipped them out into the West Indies to build up the infrastructure out there, and then put the Africans on their land, or occupy their land for themselves. So in that, see, you got Black Land, Shiloh. Shiloh is in the Bible. Chickamauga, the Chickamauga is connected to the Chitimacha, and the Chitimacha are connected to the Amaraka, and the Amaraka or the Maracas are connected to the Moors down here, connected to these Moors down here in Brazil. Okay, the ancient ones. That was part of the Tamahuancan Empire, which was also connected to the Aztec Empire. Get the book African Presence in Early America. Again, to verify things I'm talking about, get the book Primitive African Nations. Get the book Golden Trade of the Moors. You get into all of that. So this flag that you see right here, like I said, is the actual rebel flag. This banner right here is really ours. That's why they ain't had no problem getting rid of it, because it actually belongs to the black people. But the black people don't understand the context by which this was the flag by which we all unified against the invaders, the descendants of the Portuguese, Spanish, castrato Catholics and Congolese that came over here to take the land between the years of the 1811 and the so-called 1811 and 1881. That happened. They decided to launch their attack during what they called the New Madrid earthquake that happened in the year 1811, the year before the War of 1812. You see? And what we understand as the Civil War, what we understand as the American Revolution, that's all coming to us from the perspective of those who rewrote the history to hide the fact that they actually were the interlopers, and that the African slaves that were on the plantations were actually the descendants of those who invaded us on behalf of those Christians. That's why they were so miseducated and all that, because we let them language with no education, just like we put all the white indentured servants up on the plantations. And so the banker castrato Venetian niggas wanted to use them the same way they used the castratos in Rome to basically give them our land in return for killing and taking it from us. And so the Emancipation Proclamation had to be put out so that way they could free their African Masonic castrato or whatever brothers who was languishing on the plantations that was working for the so-called Southern aristocracy. The Southern aristocracy was the Moors. Get the book Black Masters, White Slaves. Get the book Black Confederates. Get the book The Forgotten Cause of the Civil War. That's what really happened. And so after we finally lost from our position, they then allowed the Mongolian through the Confiscation Act, through the Indian Removal Act, through what became the Indian Citizenship Act, through the establishment of the Dawes Rolls. They used all of that to give the Mongolian strain Indians who agreed to eventually bleach themselves out the right to be federally recognized, which would then give them a subsidy, and in return, they would basically work with the white man to basically keep us from the resources of the land, because now we would be designated as Negroes and we're now chattel property. So the flag with the scissors goes back again to us enslaving them and putting them under the generation population control system, basically the SNAP or the SNP that allowed us to shut down their genetic process and reproduce, which is what bred the insanity and homosexuality in them, because they had been descended from those deviants who were descended from those slaves who practiced the ancient carnal ways of Babylon through the mysteries of the Areopagite, and were banished to Mount Areopagus. And so the Areopagites created what they called the Midsummer Night's Dreams, where they would come and dress as Pan and do all of these fake things for the regular people, do pageants, get money, but they weren't allowed to be amongst regular society and all that. They were always banished back to the caves, to the mountains. That's why all of their gods always deal with them, Prometheus and these people being grown up in caves. When you get the book by Plato, read Plato's The Cave and these type of books, they always basically talk about the same thing, them being banished and them being put in holes and shit. So they, because they were descended from those ancient pre-flood peoples who were descended from Ralphie and those giants that were in the decadent ways of eating people and burning babies and all that type of stuff. And they kept it going. So because they weren't considered male or female, they had no rights in any society they were in. So their goal was to corrupt that. So we was down with that. And we would kidnap them, gild them, and then force them to then live under civilization. And then eventually they would go and bring their people back and do the same thing. These became the Days. These became the Mamelukes. These became the freebooters or the buccaneers. And these people became the descendants of the people like Paul Revere and these type of people. And because they were weak and because they were basically castratos and stuff themselves, we respected their valor and gave them certain responsibilities. And because they proved themselves more than the shiftless niggas that we was around at the time who was basically living off their luxury, they were given more responsibility. But secretly, they were setting up their own deal, just like what happened in the movie where the Freemason who runs the Continental wound up switching it up on John and trying to kill him. See? So what we are living in right now is the spiritual revival of the Moorish Empire and the cutting off, the snipping or the snapping or the snapture before the rapture, where all of this stuff actually happens in real time. So they're preparing us for these things with these little subtle aspects of it and creating movies by depicting what's happening, the duality between us, again, juxtaposed to the United States. We are reliving what we already did, because we are the infinity gauntlet. The gauntlet, the hand in spirituality and occultism, represents the penis. Understand? So this also represents the 5 fingers or the 5 hands of the abyss. This represents, again, the jewel that brought things into existence, which is why it's coming to pass right now. But like I also showed you, it represents that which is of the ancient Levite. So this is all of Moorish science. This don't got nothing to do with Hebrews. This don't got nothing to do with none of that. That's just how it was translated by those people who became stateless. The Hebrews became stateless because they honored not the law by which the Lord gave them, and therefore they were strucken out. They were cut off. You understand? Not because I say it, that's what they Bibles tell them. They Bibles say that. And this is from 1 Kings 7:50, and the cups and the scissors and the basins and the spoons and the fire trays, all of gold, and of the pins on which the doors were turned, the doors of the inner house, the most holy place, and the doors of the temple, all of gold. From 2 Kings, but the money was not used for making silver cups or scissors, right? Or basins, or wind instruments, or any vessels of gold in the silver, but for the house of the Lord. See how it moves up the position of the scissors. The pots and the spades and the scissors for the lights and the spoons and all of the brass vessels used in the Lord's house, they took away. See that? What happened in the movie? The people from us, they were taken away, right? They were put at the bottom, right? They were cut off, right? When the scissor is up like this is an occult meaning. When it stands straight up, it represents vengeance. It's not being used. See, but look right here. This is the Lucifer horns for the satanic people. See, it's messages for them, but it's messages for us too. Everybody be like, oh, well, this place wasn't called Morocco because this one called it Turtle Island. Yes, that's what his clan called it in his language. But he or whoever that wasn't the only language they were speaking here. The only reason why you don't have people speaking Latin and all that the way we used to is because they killed all of us that did that. Because those of us that did that spoke it looked like us. Pardon the pun. So essentially, again, I'm showing and proving. The scissors also represent, again, that which is cut, that which is always by the basin. Okay? The scissors have to be present in the temple of God for the cleaving. That's why this was the symbol that the Moors used that was flying from the flag. So when the crackers saw this coming on the shore, they went crazy. That's why when they saw this, they went crazy because they knew. These is the ones that defeated us in 1864. Get the book Slavery Vote in Baha'i in Brazil, and it says that we basically shut them down through the Seminole War and all of that up until 1864. So if that was the case, then where was this Civil War they talking about when they was killing all these white people? Those was all the white people that we owned or was fighting for us. Jefferson Davis and them was occupying the office that was being paid for by the Southern aristocracy. That Southern aristocracy was connected by these Moors from these clans that were technologically advanced. Look, these niggas had cannons. You understand? And had their own diplomatic relationships outside of the United States that had nothing to do with the Northern Moors, who was now in cahoots with these people. So in that, the Buffalo Soldiers and these people was actually traitors. They actually was fighting against their own people. Which may explain why Bob Marley bigged them up, because Bob Marley is a Breakspear. And the Breakspears was one of the Italian, Venetian, oligarchical, Illuminati, blood-drinking piece of shit families that's destroying the world right now. But I'm in the movie. Now, the wild stuff is I'm in the movie, and when it got to this part, because now I'm like, wow, he walking across the hot Arabian desert. They really going in on the ritual. In the movie, I'm thinking this while I'm watching it, right? Then when he get to this part, I'm watching it, and I look over. These crackers is the white people on this side of me is looking at me kind of wild, and then the other way, and I realize, oh, I'm wearing the same thing on my head that this nigga got on, that all these niggas got on in the movie. More, and they peeping it in the dark. In the dark, they peeping game. Where I'm so in the movie like, wow. Then I'm like, wow, yeah, this is what's going on, more. This is what it is. This is why they trying to really get people to not really do the Nas to Moors. They getting dirty Moors out there to throw dirt on their own name to get little pieces of crumbs and stuff. But it's not going to work. Just stay on your deen and keep away from all the nonsense, and you're going to be straight. Regardless to what these niggas say and do, they know they can't. When I saw that, I was like, nah.